it's really funny. As I was thinking about this real estate idea, Kendrick, my co-founder, we're like, hey, let's start a real estate company. Let's go buy real estate. And then we take a step back and we're like, wait, how the do we even buy real? We don't have any money. We just graduated. We had no money. What do we do now?
In this special episode, I find myself in the hot seat as Daniel Paulino takes over interviewing duties to dig into my story for once. From driving an RV across the country to my childhood as a TED Talk obsessed middle child, Daniel uncovers the quirks and experiences that shaped me into the founder I am today. Between laughs and surprisingly emotional moments, we explore everything from my delusional confidence to how that first $500,000 investment felt like we'd somehow tricked our way into success. With his industry wisdom and genuine curiosity, Daniel pulls stories from me I've never shared publicly before.
After graduation, what did you do?
I'd grown up doing real estate. My mom was a real estate agent before we were born. My dad would buy and sell land. So when I said selling things, it would be land. I had this crazy idea where I was like, we want to build this real estate business. And in that process, we were like, wow, this is so painful. For us, it was life or death. We deferred rent. We did whatever we could. We walked away being like, holy shit, that was so shitty. You know, it was just so broken, and we were like, we need to build a business that solves this problem. And that was the genesis for Zuma.
What are some of your earliest memories, and how do you think they influenced who you are today?
I was really obsessed with TED Talks. I would listen to these TED Talks before bed, and I was just so inspired by them. And I remember like sharing that with people, and they were just like, what are you doing? And they just found it weird. And I think ever since then.
Well, so Shiv, welcome to your own show.
Man, this it feels weird. It's easier for me I was telling you, it's easier to ask questions than it is to answer them. So,
well, the good news is I've never done this before. So might be nervous to be on the other side, but I'm nervous because I have no idea what I'm doing. So
I love how this came
we're in it
across.
Together. We're going to make it happen.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, I'm really excited. When you hit me up about it, I was like, like maybe, you asked me and I was like, kind of like avoiding it a little bit. And you asked me again and I was kind of avoiding it. And then I was like, I know Daniel, I've known him for a couple of years. I'm going to be at Social Media Summit. So let's do it. I'm excited.
I'm glad that you took me up on this. Maybe I shouldn't have offered because I could end up making some mistakes today, but it's all good. It's part of the authenticity of it.
Exactly.
And like I said, I'll return the favor and I'll be on the other side of the seat here.
I'm excited.
Sooner than later. So I want to start today by diving into something that shapes all of us, our early years. What are some of your earliest memories, and how do you think they influenced who you are today?
Yeah, man, I've asked this question, so I should know how to answer it. I've thought pretty deeply about this, right? This is something that I think very deeply about because I've always been somebody that has been obsessed with personal growth and improving and getting better. And I think in order to understand how to get better, you need to understand the early inputs that form who you are. Because oftentimes from 0 to 12, those early inputs are defining whether you've had some traumatic life experience or something of the equivalent. So I think for me, something that I feel like is a pretty early core memory that I've only recently uncovered or made sense of is I'm a middle child. So I have an older sister and a younger brother. And I didn't really understand the whole idea of like the middle child. Like people would talk about like the middle child syndrome and things like that. And I never really understood it. But when I started thinking about my upbringing, my brother is the youngest, and he's extremely friendly and affable, and people like him and sociable and all that stuff. My sister is very similar and more as the older sibling, like the kind of the pioneer of a lot of things. And when I think about like some of those early memories, what comes to mind is when I was between 4 and 6, my grandparents lived with us. During that time, I remember feeling like I was kind of like, I wasn't getting attention, I think. That's the simplest way to put it. I wasn't really getting attention. Like my younger brother was the youngest and my grandparents loved him. My grandparents loved my sister. My grandmother, had dreams of becoming a doctor, and my sister at a very young age wanted to be a doctor. She's a doctor now, so they had that connection. And I remember kind of feeling like I was ostracized, not intentionally, and I don't hold anything against anybody, but ostracized in some way. Like there's small examples where, we'd get home, wait from a party with my parents, and it'd be 1 a.m. and my sister and brother would be exhausted, and I remember my parents would be there, and then they would carry my brother and my sister, and I would be like, I'm just gonna walk, I'm just gonna walk on my own. Or even early memories of my parents, sometimes we would all sleep. My parents had a huge California king bed, and I remember examples where my brother and sister would sleep on the bed, but I was like, I'm going to sleep on the ground. And I don't know if it was self-inflicted, whether it was intentional that I ostracized myself, but there's very clear memories of kind of feeling like I was a black sheep, feeling like I was, I didn't fit in, right? And I think there's many examples when you look at, even as I've grown up and, I lived in India, I've always felt that like I don't connect with a lot of people. A lot of people I don't connect with. When I was younger in middle school and high school, I remember having all these interests, right? I was really obsessed with TED Talks. This was before podcasting. So TED Talks was like, do you know TED Talks?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this was before, 2006 or 7 or 8 when podcasting was less mainstream. I would listen to these TED Talks before bed, and I was just so inspired by them. And I remember like sharing that with people, and they were just like, what are you doing? And they just found it weird. And I think ever since then, I've had this habit of like being independent and kind of living my own life and feeling like I don't fit in. So, going back to the question, what are some of my early memories? I think, feeling like I was excluded. I don't hold anything against my family. I don't think they've asked me through the years, actually. This is where I realized that I only put this together actually a year ago, because my parents over the years would ask me like, oh, did you ever feel like you were like left out by your grandparents? Or do you ever feel like, and I was like, no, I don't think that. But as I've started listening to more podcasts and trying to educate myself of my early years, because I asked this question to everybody, I've realized that actually has had a massive impact on me.
So it sounds like podcasts are a way for you to like explore your inner self some more and just to really better understand yourself and do a lot of reflection.
Yeah. I mean, I tell this to people, like, in all honesty, this show is somewhat a selfish pursuit, right? It's hopefully, the byproduct is it impacts the industry and it helps people. But in some ways it's a medium to better understand who I am, right? Through questions that I ask people, I get more and more informed of who I am, right? That's why when you listen to the podcast, there's certain questions I always ask, because I'm trying to understand that of myself. Like, what is the impact on money on your life? What are the impact of these early years? But yeah, I think that's exactly right. Is podcasting is a medium for me to understand myself and to improve myself. And now if you ask me, okay, like, why do I want to improve myself? I think that's a more complicated question, because it is basically assuming that you are not enough. Like, you need to get better. You need to do more. You need to build this company. You need to get to this revenue milestone. You need to find this girlfriend. You need to do all this stuff. And ever since I remember, I've always had this desire to improve myself. There's early memories of me in 7th grade. I lived in an apartment building, and I lived on the 12th floor. So I would, every day after school, I would time myself on how fast I can run up the stairs. And I was, even at that young age, I was like, oh, I can do better. And I would optimize that small thing every day after school. And I think it's just because, I don't know, I think there's two things. I love improving because I think there's dopamine associated with it. It feels good to achieve and to accomplish things. But I think it's also a way to fill the void of, I think, me not feeling like I'm enough by default.
That's a powerful force that all of us deal with, and I think it comes to life in many different ways. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy to talk about those things, but let's take a step back, back to your childhood, and talk about, what was your family dynamic like when you were growing up? What was your household like? I mean, you talked about, being the middle child, but let's hear a little bit more about your family and the people in it. And, you mentioned your grandparents living with you. Were you at that stage between 4 and 6 in the US or?
Yeah. So I was born in San Jose in the Bay Area. When I was 12, we moved to India. I'll get to that, but let me focus on your question. My mother is extremely positive, very loving, super warm, like, the prototypical mother that you hear times 100, right? Super warm and friendly. My dad increasingly is now more like that now. And he always was. I think he expresses love differently, but my dad is a very interesting guy. I mean, he also had a complicated kind of childhood and upbringing. But my dad, he's both my parents are super fun, which is really funny. So I think I'm the most serious person in my family. My family is very jovial. They are the family that would host all the parties. Growing up, my house was always the house that we would host all the parties. All my friends would come in. My mom would, leave us alcohol and it was very fun. Like when I went to college, my dad made a massive collage of photos and gave it to me. And the tagline was "Study hard, party harder." So if that gives you normally it should be the other way around. If that gives you some idea of my parents, they were always worried about me working too hard. They were always like, you should relax a little bit more. You should have more fun. But very, very fun, easygoing parents. I never had any stress around academics. I don't know if you know anything about Indian families, but Indian parents are very, especially if you grow up in the Bay Area, very, academics are number one, study hard, all of that stuff, and very micromanagerial on that. My parents were super chill.
So it sounds like you, since you were a child and it's come into your adulthood, you've had this kind of self-inflicted pressure. Like you've got to continue to prove yourself. And perhaps as a child, you thought that you needed to prove your worth somehow. And that's what made you more serious and more introspective and kind of methodical in a lot of the things that you put yourself through to be competitive. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's other examples where, when I look back, sometimes I wonder, am I telling myself these stories and connecting is this actually why I am the way I am? Or am I creating, these are all true stories, but am I creating a false correlation to my early years? So this is something that I still don't know. But in any case, some of the other, when I think about that, I think about this other incident that happened. So when I was in 8th grade, I moved to India when I was 12, and I went to 7th grade there all the way through 12th grade. And moving to India was a pretty drastic change because my family, I had visited India, but living in India is very different than visiting for a month or two with your grandparents. I went to an international school, and very quickly I actually made a bunch of friends and was, popular and got along with everybody and was super social. But in 8th grade, I got into a fight with this one kid. My school was what's called a boarding and day scholar school, which means that some people lived on the campus and some people commuted. I commuted, but the kids that were the boarders were very, very close, very tight-knit. And I got into a fight with one of those kids. And the next day I came to school and everybody in the grade was acting really weird and not really talking to me. And I was wondering what happened. And I remember this so clearly. I was at the top, in the building, in the hall, and I see this guy, and I look at his arm, and on his cast, he had a cast. And remember in school, people would sign the cast. He had GIG written on it. And that same day, I realized that stood for Gettu is gay. Gettu is my last name. And over the next 3 months, every single kid in my grade would write that on their arm. In swim class, it would be on their back. And it's just a childish thing, right? They're trying to make fun of you and bully you. And I'm not gay, but it was, when you're ostracized that way, going from being somewhat popular to now, spending time in the bathroom. I would spend lunches in the bathroom because I was like, I'd rather just be in the bathroom. It was pretty traumatic. And this was like months. This is like not a bully. This is like bullying is like, okay, you get bullied. This was like a 3-month deep isolation from the entire grade. And the reason why I tell you that is I think it's another pivotal moment that really reinforced the idea of like personal growth and development and agency, right? I'm a really big believer in agency. I feel like people should take ownership of their emotional state and their situation. And I remember I lived 1 hour away from school. So every morning I'd wake up really early and we'd go on a bus and we'd travel 1 hour there and an hour and a half back because of traffic. And I remember in the bus, I would listen to this song, Don't Worry, Be Happy, the Bobby McFerrin song. And what I was trying to do was actually just state change, like change my mind, my mental state, and prepare for what was to come. And none of this is exaggeration. It was it was pretty intense emotionally back then. And I think this was around the time where I also got into the TED Talks, and I would listen to, people inspiring stories and hear stories of how people change their mental state. And I just became really obsessed. I think this is another trigger of why I just became really obsessed with personal growth. And 3 months later, they all apologized and I'm friends with them now. But back then it was a pretty traumatic incident.
I can totally see why. I mean, as a kid, or even in high school and college, I have memories of at times being part of the group and then at times being where you're like ostracized from the group and it feeling like it's like the end of your world. Like you're as an adolescent or a child, it's so traumatic that you feel like you can't recover from it. Whereas, adults and others are telling you it's no big deal. This is how kids act. And, I know that that's a very personal experience. I'm picking up on a pattern that I want to ask you more about. It seems like in your own family, because of being the middle child, you felt like you didn't belong. You shared that earlier. Then there's perhaps a part of you that growing up as an immigrant, even though you were in the Bay Area, coming from a family from a different country, you perhaps also felt like you didn't belong. And then the irony of all ironies is you go back to your parents' home country and you more than likely feel like you don't belong because even though you have the same heritage and the same skin color, you didn't have the same experiences growing up. Is this a pattern that you feel has been present for many years in your life?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I haven't thought about that, or I haven't seen that thread. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I even physically, right? Like you're a big guy, you're a tall guy. I mean, you know what it was like growing up. Indians in general aren't super tall, so even physically, I stood out. In 7th grade, I was very tall. Indian people are not very tall, and I remember just never feeling like I belonged. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't feel like I belonged, and I knew how to. I was self-aware enough and societally aware enough to know how to play the game to belong, but authentically, I didn't feel that. It was almost like I was living two lives. Like there was all these pursuits and interests I had at a very young age that I knew that if I talked about, people wouldn't understand or they wouldn't care. So I lived almost this double life where I'd come home, I'd be watching TED Talks, I'd be exploring my curiosity, I'd be learning. But in 8th grade and 9th grade and 7th grade, I didn't have circles to do that.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's spot on.
There's so many parallels to my childhood here because grew up in a, obviously from an immigrant family as well, and feeling like I didn't really fit in with the kids that I was growing up with here in the States. And then I would go to my parents' country for the summer and felt like I didn't fit in with them because even though they understand I'm a family member, they're like, well, he's the American one and he doesn't speak our language as well. So feeling like you don't fit in is something that's been a part of my, my life. And I know it has a lot of repercussions for me. So Yeah, it's something it's super personal. I want to ask you about, as a child from an immigrant family, I remember feeling this pressure to make something of myself, and and I was constantly reminded by my parents that they made a huge sacrifice in leaving their country so that their future children could have a better life. So I felt this burden, or this almost this debt, to make sure that they felt like whatever I turned out to be was worth it. What was your experience in that regard?
So much of the pressure I put on myself so much of the pressure I have is self-inflicted. I think I'm in this rare bubble where my parents weren't pushy. I didn't have that traditional pressure, which I very much empathize with and I understand very deeply because I have friends with, where, the immigrant upbringing and the pressure to do majorly inflicted by your parents. I didn't have that. I think my parents, I don't know if this was by design, whether it was a feature or a bug or intentional or not, but they didn't put a lot of pressure on me. I think it could have been because they saw that I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think it could have been because that's potentially the way they were raised, but I didn't have that. And in some ways, I'm actually very grateful for that, because I think it allowed me the space to design my life on my terms. I think one of the best things that parents can do is instill early self-belief into your kid, confidence into your kid. Because ultimately, I just got off, I spent an hour and 50 minutes talking to Orr, who we both know. And one of my big takeaways from him was that you can do whatever you want to do. Like I can do whatever I want to do. You can do whatever you want to do. We're all empowered. We're all capable. And I think when I think about why I may believe this, I think a lot of it has to do with my parents and just the confidence I felt that they had in me, right? The confidence that I felt that like I could almost do no wrong, or I was, they were proud of me, and the pride they had, right? The pride they had. So I'm very fortunate where I didn't get a lot of the pressure that most immigrant kids got. And in some ways I got the opposite. And it gave me a lot of confidence, or delusional confidence, early on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's really nice to feel that support, but it sounds like for your whole life you've been your toughest critic. What do you think drives that? Why have you always been such a harsh critic of yourself and had such high expectations of yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to answer because it's such a complex question. Because many people don't have that, right? There's many people in the world that like go through life being okay day to day and don't have this like burden. Like I have a very deep burden on me somehow. It's very difficult for me to sit still. It's very difficult. Part of the reason why I listen to a lot of podcasts is because I can't, it's hard for me to be alone, and you can be physically alone, but to be mentally alone with your thoughts is different, right? So now, why do I do that? I think I just attach a lot of my self-worth to my accomplishments. I think that, I attach a lot of my self-worth to my accomplishments. So it's almost like the more I do, the more credit or like deposit I'm putting in a bank account of self-worth. And every moment I'm not doing something, that bank account is depleting, and it depletes fast. So where does this come from? It could come from feeling like I have to prove myself because I felt neglect, maybe, or I didn't get a lot of attention growing up, or at least that was my perception of the situation. It could come from feeling like I have to prove myself to people that like bullied me or whatever in school. It could come from feeling like I was an overweight kid. I don't know if you knew that, but I was a pretty overweight kid, and I lost a lot of weight in 7th grade. But most of my image was tied to that and But it's such a complex question. But I think it really just comes down to feeling like I need to prove myself. I don't know. I need to prove myself.
I totally understand it. I mean, I have the same kind of burden that I carry. It's not for the same reasons, but it's like this insatiable desire to continue to achieve. And there's never a finish line. It's just milestones, and you got to continue to go at it. And it resonates so much what you said about that accomplishments. It's almost like a leaky bucket. It's like if you don't keep going, that's when it becomes evident that there's a leak. So you keep filling it up just to maintain a level of feeling like I'm actually doing something. And as soon as you take a rest, that's when you notice, wait, the water level is actually declining.
Exactly. And I think it becomes even more complex when I will even gamify rest. I will even if you say, okay, well, why don't you just like sit still? Like, or when I graduated college, I did a 3-month Euro trip and traveled and, went to 13 different countries. But for 3 weeks of that time, I was actually living in an ashram. Me and Kendrick, my co-founder, lived in an ashram, and we meditated. And even I remember then it was still being I was gamifying it, right? It wasn't truly, I didn't detach fully, right? There was still a goal. And whether it was, to tell people I went to an ashram and like I'm this like worldly balanced person who can pursue career, but also has this like dimension of me. So if I'm being honest with myself, even rest is gamified, right? But I'm not saying this with pride. I'm saying this in some ways like it's kind of sad, right? I don't want to be so like. I don't want to feel like this pressure, it's exhausting in some ways.
It, again, resonates. As you know, I'm on a career break right now, and I actually have a more structured and longer day than when I'm in my professional life. And it's because I just have this deep fear of feeling like I'm not accomplishing things. So I'm making my day so structured and long that it's actually exhausting. And so now it's when I realize that it's actually driven by me and not by external forces. And it's an interesting realization because it helps you to better understand why you're driven the way that you are. And it's something that you wish you could turn off. And I feel like we're going to need to have some more conversations at some point about that. Let's talk a little bit about, kind of further down the path of your childhood or adolescence. I have really vivid memories of not feeling like I fit in during high school and feeling so uncomfortable with my skin color, with my background. And that had a lot of implications into my confidence level. What was your experience in high school?
Yeah. It was similar, right? High school. So I was still in India. So I went to the same school. It was an international school from 7th grade to 12th grade. It's very weird. In some ways it was almost a dichotomy. And I'm balancing two opposing things at the same time. I had a lot of confidence, but I also had very little confidence. And it's hard to understand what I mean by that, but in some ways I felt like delusionally special. Like the isolation, there was some pride in the isolation. I took pride in, I remember feeling like I took pride in being kind of the wolf alone and like doing my own thing. Like you guys are going and having fun. I'm like, grinding out here. I remember feeling that actually. Yeah. It's funny you asked that question. I remember feeling that. I remember it was like a little bit there's a little ego to it where it's like, I'm like getting better while you guys are like doing whatever. And at the same time, I was lost a little bit, right? I didn't have a lot of confidence and direction in, what I was going to do next. I didn't have a lot of self-belief. I did well in school, but I wasn't the most brilliant person. I wasn't the best in school. So I remember feeling like confident that I was like different, but then also just lost.
Those are some, those are really pivotal moments in your life where you're, then you're moving on from high school to college and then kind of wondering what that's going to be like. So
Yeah.
do you recall in high
Yeah.
school what your thought process was? I'm about to move on to college. And
Yeah.
it sounds like that was around the time that either your whole family moved back to the States or you did. So tell us about that transition. Like what was on your mind during that time?
Yeah, college was very complex actually. So my family still stayed in India. I went to college in the US. I went to USC. I studied industrial and systems engineering. And actually college was very challenging for me because I had grown up in India. I went to an international school. And the first group that I thought I would connect with were the international kids. So somebody in India who knew I was going to USC, who we were it was a friend of a friend, reached out, said, "Do you want a room together?" And I said yes. And for the first 2 years of college, that's actually when I felt really lost because I was part of this group. I had this big social circle on the outside where I was part of this international group where, there were all these very wealthy kids, and they loved doing all of these things and they could spend all this money. But my upbringing was very different. We never taught, like, I didn't have money. Like, money was a constant point of friction for my family. That's what they fought about. That's what I heard. That's where tears happen. That's where everything was about money, Like my dad retired pretty early from 2008 to 2021. It was really, really tough because he had to put 3 kids through college with no income, like very, very little income, like, $40,000 a year, like very little income. And we were constantly, trying to sell things. And then once we sold things, that would give us a little bit of money to like pay the bills. But it was just such a point of friction in my life. And when I got to college, money is that's why I bring it up a lot in podcasts, because it's a very complex thing for me. I've thought a lot about it. I grew up with no money. I felt financially insecure. One of my biggest drivers was financial security and stability, because I thought financial stability was the path to safety, and everybody wants safety ultimately. That's what people are striving for. But when I got to USC and I was in this wealthy school with all these wealthy international kids, and I couldn't spend the same amount of money that they could. I couldn't go to the same places. I just felt trapped, and I didn't have the same values. And I felt very trapped. And again, I was in this social circle where on the outside it looked like I had a lot of friends, but on the inside it was, again, I didn't belong. Right, I didn't feel like I belonged. So thankfully, sophomore year, I met Kendrick, my co-founder, and I met Skylar, my other good friend, who's our head of engineering, and kind of pivoted out of that social circle and entered a different social circle. But college was very complex for that reason. Again, I didn't feel like I belonged. Money was always tight, and I didn't feel like I had a good friend group.
Yeah, that's challenging. I remember you saying earlier that as a child, being a middle child, you felt like even though you were loved and you had a great home, that you felt like you were overlooked. And you said that when your siblings got into bed, sometimes with your parents, that you wouldn't try to get on the bed, that you would stay on the floor. So you didn't want to be a burden. It's a very real thing. Then you're going, your father retires early and money's tight, and he's got to put those 3 kids through college. So Did you feel like I don't want to be a burden again and go out of your way to try to release pressure from them so that they can take care of your sister and your brother?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. You asked me about high school. I remember my parents paid for this college counselor or whatever for my sister and my brother, and it was it was a lot of money back then, but it was like $1,000 or $2,000. And I remember again like feeling that, I don't know whether it's pride, but I remember feeling like I'm not gonna like make them pay for that. I didn't do the tutoring that was like other, my brother did. And I remember feeling like I had to like constrain and save them money, partly because I was also the kid that knew the most about their financial situation. I would ask them a lot. They would tell me a lot because I think I was just curious, and I like business and I like to understand that. But then I think it was also an outlet for them, right, to relieve stress and to share their circumstance. And my brother and sister couldn't connect with that. So it felt very burdensome because I knew everything. I knew I had access to all the bank accounts, this post-college. I knew how much money there was. And, there would be examples where we would never go out as a family and have, we would not get appetizers. Like, when you go to dinner, you'd have the main course, and that's what you'd get. You'd get the main course. You wouldn't get the appetizers and then the drinks and all this stuff. And I remember always calculating like, okay, this is, let's look at the item first. Let's check the cheapest one. And then if it's the cheapest one, how do I pattern match that with something I like? And then that would be my order, right? And like, I would do all these optimizations, or like when my parents would give me money, I would not get a lot of them. And then, oh yeah, I remember when we'd go out with our friends, let's say I was a little bit hungry. I knew that if I got something, then we'd all have to split the bill evenly. And I didn't want to pay that much money because I didn't want to burden my parents. So I'd basically not get anything, because if you don't get anything, then it's like, oh yeah, Shiv didn't eat anything. Like, he's not going to pay. And I'm also not going to be the guy who's like, oh, I only ordered this. Like, so I would do all these like little mental calculations just to reduce the financial burden on my parents. So yeah, money was a really big topic in my life, and constant point of frustration for my parents. My dad didn't come to my college graduation because we couldn't afford an $800 plane ticket. So yeah, it's been a big driver, I guess.
Did you overanalyze that when your father couldn't come to your graduation? Was it one of those situations where you're analyzing it and thinking, if this was my brother or my sister, he would have been there?
Possibly. I think you always do that. I think my dad and I are the most similar. I would say my dad is very similar, or I'm similar to my dad. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So out of the 3 siblings, I'm most similar to my dad. Usually what I see is that if you're similar to somebody, that's how you get close. People hire people that are, similar to them. That's the way, humanity works. You feel connected to people that are similar to you. So in some ways, like, I would say my dad and I were close. But yeah, I think even back then, I mean, let me play that incident out, right? So, my family came, my mom came, my brother and sister came, and and my dad was like, yeah, we don't have, there's also more complex things where, I won't get into just family dynamics and things. So I remember, but again, I go back to like, I think what I'm trying to play the emotion out because I'm trying to understand it. There was this emotion of like, I don't need that. I think that's my normal reaction to things is like, I'm going to take agency. Like, I don't need him to come,
The same as the bed. I don't need to be on the bed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a defense mechanism.
It's a defense mechanism. So I think like, I think I have this natural thing, like when something doesn't happen, it's like, I don't, I'm going to take ownership. I don't need that. Yeah. I never made that parallel, but yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah. I think, those are patterns that we all have in our lives. And it's something that sometimes we don't realize. It's just how we react to situations, but it's because we've seen the pattern over and over. So let's kind of switch gears and talk about, coming up on graduation. You mentioned obviously your father wasn't able to make it, but after graduation, what did you do? What was the next step after graduation?
Yeah, so I graduated. I had interned at this company called PwC, which is a consulting firm, my sophomore year. My sophomore year and my junior year. I had a lot of issues with confidence too, actually, in school, because I think what I found was people were pretty smart in school, and I just found myself not interested in a lot of things that like people were interested in. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself career-wise. I'd see all these kids from USC like doing the investment banking path or the McKinsey path and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm like that smart to do that. So similarly, I kind of just took the job that I was working at because I had interned there and they had given me an offer junior year. So I was like, okay, let me just take, I have this job, like, let me just do it. So after graduating, I worked at PwC and I did technology consulting. We were implementing Salesforce for large companies, actually building AI applications for CRMs, ironically enough. And I did that for 2 years, but I would say emotionally, I really did it for 3 months. Because what happened was I immediately, at the time I had more time, I was listening to more podcasts, and I stumbled upon this podcast called BiggerPockets. And BiggerPockets was, so a little bit about me. My family I'd grown up doing real estate. My mom was a real estate agent before we were born. My dad would buy and sell land. So when I said selling things, it would be land. And I grew up with real estate, and I saw real estate. I had read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, if you've heard of it. It's a classic one. And I grew up, remember, one of my drivers was financial security, right? That was a very big driver. So I said, okay, if I have this problem of financial security, how can I solve it? So the first answer and the first like category I looked at was real estate. I was like, okay, real estate, stable, secure, cash flow, alternative streams of income, all of this stuff. So I started obsessing over BiggerPockets, listening to all these stories of people who had like made all this money and, came from being homeless to millionaire they had all these fascinating stories. And I think what I really resonated with, it was everyday people. It was everyday people like teachers and janitors and police officers and everyday people that would basically build a reliable, repeatable source of income outside of their job. In college, I read this book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. He's a famous economist. If you've heard of Black Swan, a Black Swan event, he's largely responsible for coining the term Black Swan. And in this book, Anti-Fragile, the whole principle is how do you build a system that actually gets stronger with chaos or disorderliness. So if you think about something that's fragile, a glass, you drop the glass, it breaks. You induce stress on the glass, it breaks. If you think about the opposite of fragile, it's robust. So you have like a metal, ball or whatever, you drop it, like nothing really happens. But the idea of anti-fragility is that you actually induce more stress on the system and actually become stronger. An example of this is micro stress when you're working out, right? You induce micro stress and your muscle gets bigger. And I just became really fascinated with this idea of anti-fragility. And in parallel to that, he also talks about this term called optionality, right? Self-explanatory, you want to have options. And I became obsessed with this idea of optionality. So why am I talking about this? I wanted optionality. I wanted alternative streams of income. I didn't want to depend on some other end entity to dictate whether I have a job or not. And then they fire me and now I don't have a stream of income. I was like, I didn't like that concept. So I was like, how do I build an alternative stream of income that will give me optionality and will make me anti-fragile? So if stress happens or chaos happens, I'm not subjected to some, I'm not fragile. So I looked at real estate. I was excited by real estate. I listened to all these podcasts. And I was like, I'm going to go and like buy real estate. And at the same time, Kendrick, my co-founder, who was, he was off like in Washington. He interned at SpaceX for a little bit, but was working for his dad. And we had both done this thing called Landmark. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a personal development course. And it's a 2-day, like 12-hour intensive thing. We had both done it separately. And at the time I was looking to buy real estate, in the program, you have to do this one thing where they ask you to call somebody that you haven't talked to in a while and share with them something truthful and honest. And I remember I was listening to all these podcasts. I was deep in this, and I was exploring real estate, and I was excited by this. And I think I'm on a date, and I get this call, and the date's about to finish, and it's Kendrick, and I hadn't talked to him in a while. And he calls me, and he's it's pretty emotional when you have to do this call. I did it for my parents. I remember calling them. He was a little bit emotional, and he was like, hey, we haven't talked in a long time. We were such good friends in college, and we lived together, and we traveled Europe together. Me and him did the 3-month backpacking trip, and we kind of fell apart for a little bit. And he called me, and he was like, hey, like we should catch up. Like we should catch up. And it's really funny because at that same time, as I was thinking about this real estate idea, I actually was thinking about contacting him because I was like, hey, he would be really great to partner with. Like he is different than me. He, was complimentary in some ways. And I was like, wow, like I was just like gonna call you. So we caught up, and ironically enough, I think he was also in this part of his life where he didn't feel fulfilled and wanted to do something different. And Kendrick's a pretty big risk taker. If you know him, like he leans into risk quite a bit. And I knew that was good because he would be a good business partner. So we both go and we're like, hey, let's start a real estate company. Let's go buy real estate. So we look at Atlanta, and we're like, Atlanta's a growing market. We look at all these trends of population growth and job growth and all this stuff. And we're like, let's settle on Atlanta, Georgia. And we find a broker online. We go through all the BiggerPockets steps. They tell you to go on this and call a broker and do all these things. And we call him, and we have this conversation with him. And then we take a step back, and we're like, wait, how the fuck do we even buy we don't have any money. Like, what are we going to go and buy real estate when we don't have money? We just graduated. We had no money. So we were like, wait, like we can't do this. We don't have any money. Like, what do we do now? And as I was listening to more podcasts, he was listening to more podcasts. He became equally interested. And we read this article, and the title of the article was How to Cash Flow $10,000 Without Owning Any Real Estate. And we read this article, and we contacted the guy, and we learned about how he had built this Airbnb business. This was 2018, where he would rent apartments from people with the permission of the landlord and turn them into Airbnbs. And it was genius. We were like, wow, you don't need to own real estate, and you can cash flow more than a owner. Because, we were looking at, because the idea was like we would buy these real estate properties, eventually cash flow $10,000 a month and quit our jobs. But then when we looked at the numbers, it was like $200 a month per unit. And then it would take like 10 years to buy all these units. And we're like, how are we going to do this? So we looked at this business, and we saw the economics, and it was like, wow, you could make $1,000 a month by renting an apartment for $3,000 and subletting it on Airbnb for $4,000 a month. All we need to do is like furnish them. And we were just like fascinated by the idea. So we go, we contact the guy who wrote the article. We're super excited by it. And we end up basically deciding that Kendrick was kind of in transition. He was working with his dad a little bit. And at the same time, we got to get to know this landlord. He was one of my parents' friends. When I was interested in real estate, I contacted everybody I knew. And I was like, who does real estate? You need to connect me with them. So I talked to dozens of people. There was this one guy who owned 1,000 units in the Bay Area. Owned it for 30, 40 years. You can imagine how much it's cash flowing. Super spiritual guy. I got connected to him, and we really clicked because he was extremely smart, very measured, very balanced, had this spiritual side to him. And at the time, Kendrick and I, we had just done this meditation retreat in the hills of Italy, living in this ashram. And we end up basically getting close to him. spending time with him, going to his house every week to meditate. So we'd go to his house and we'd meditate for an hour. And during one of these meditations, I had this crazy idea where I was like, we want to build this real estate business. We need to figure out how to get properties. This landlord has a vacancy. He just was telling us, complaining that he lost this leasing agent. Why don't we become leasing agents? Why don't we work for this guy? We can take all the vacant properties that he has. We can learn about the industry. We can see the problems. We can add value. And it was just beautifully synergistic in all these ways. And I remember calling Kendrick on the way back from meditating from this guy's house and explaining the idea to him. And I knew that at the time, admittedly, I wasn't a risk taker. I wasn't willing. Remember, I cared about financial security. I wasn't willing to leave my job. But I knew that Kendrick was more bold, and he was willing to take that risk. And I called him and I explained this idea, and I was like, what if you become a leasing agent? What if you work for this guy for free? And I was so excited because I saw it in my mind, and Kendrick's pretty optimistic and positive. And he was like, really? Like, you want me to I worked at SpaceX. I have a mechanical engineering degree. You want to? I was like, yeah, like we can do this. Like this could be a great way for us to build this relationship with the owner, and he can see all the great work we're doing. We can learn about the industry. Maybe he can be our investor one day. And I'm telling him all this stuff, and he is kind of expectedly like, what the fuck? Like, what do you mean? And we talked over the idea, and we finally came to the conclusion that like let's do this. So we put together this presentation, and we're like, how can we show value to this landlord? How can we convince him that we can become leasing agents? For some reason, we were like, we got to convince this guy. And we're like, we're going to offer to work for free. So we were like, we're not going to take any money. We're going to offer to work for free. We built a presentation on how we can increase. We studied all these terms, NOI and income, and every dollar that increases on revenue is 25x the asset price, and all this cap rate and all this stuff. We built this presentation. We sat down with him, and we're like, we're going to offer to work for free. Here's how we're going to increase your NOI. You can do this billboard. You can do all of this. We can start charging. And we end up, after 30 minutes presenting to him, getting rejected. He's like, sorry, guys, you don't have the experience. I'm sorry. And we're like, what? What do you mean? We're offering to work for free. We are capable. We're determined. We're willing. And he's like, I'm sorry. And we're like, what? And we're like, whatever. And a week later, I'm in India for my friend's wedding. He calls Kendrick frantically, and he's like, one of our employees just absconded to Europe or South America or something, or Mexico, and stole like $500,000 of rent, and he was like collecting money on the side. Like, I need somebody right now. So he's like, I need somebody next week. And Kendrick's like, okay, like I'll come. And Kendrick, in 1 week, moves from Washington State to Redwood City, California, lives in a Class D building that had infested with cockroaches, spent the first week, this was Thanksgiving, so spent the first week Thanksgiving in Denny's. And at the same time these are his words, the most inspired and excited he's ever felt. And it was this weird dichotomy of everything. You're living in a Class D building with cockroaches and working as a leasing agent and facing all this external eyeballs of like, why is this guy becoming a leasing agent? But he, at the same time, felt inspired, and so did I. And over the next 9 months, Kendrick was a leasing agent. I was balancing both jobs. So I was still working full time, but I was doing all this stuff on the side. And over the next 9 months, Kendrick became a leasing agent. We got like dozens of properties. Every vacancy that would come, we would take it over. And we built this business that was generating like $30,000 or $40,000 a month in cash flow while working full time. And this owner was like, what are these kids doing? Like, how are they like doing all this? And he was just like kind of enamored, or just like, what are these kids doing? And at the end of 2019, he decides to offer us $500,000. And that was our first investment. And I remember like walking away with Kendrick and being like, oh my God, this guy is going to give us $500,000 like to build our business. Like, how did we like trick him? Did we trick him? Or, you know, like how did we do this? And we were just so like excited and like, there's nothing like that first money or first check or first payment from a customer or there's no experience like that, right? And we just walked away being like, I remember giving him a hug and we were like, dude, we made it. Like, we got it. We got this money. And, you know, a week later, I quit my job. We're like, let's take this money, let's invest it, let's 10x this business. And let's see what happens. Maybe we have a cash flowing business that can fund a technology company. Maybe we just keep this business, but let's go. We have the drive.
So he gave you $500,000 for what? Was it for the
Airbnb
Airbnb
business.
where you're doing arbitrage?
Exactly.
Okay.
So he gave us $500,000 because he saw the numbers and he was like, okay, if I put in, you know, $500,000, like I could, you know, whatever. We had made this Excel document and pitched something. I don't know how we convinced him to do that, but we did it. And 5 months later, COVID hit. And we go from making $40,000 a month in free cash flow to losing $100,000 a month in 5 days. The world collapsed. The pandemic destroyed travel. It destroyed hospitality. If you listen to what happened to Airbnb, it was like that, obviously on a much smaller scale, but completely demolished and decimated our business. And we didn't raise that much money relative to how much we were burning. We had payroll. And we were in this extremely challenging situation where I had just left my job. We were so excited to build this business. And in days, it collapsed under us. And I remember just feeling kind of like depressed. I was like, what, why, like, why? Like what we put in all this effort. We worked so hard. We made these sacrifices. We did all these things. Like, why, you know? But very quickly we started studying COVID, really understand. This was February, March, you know, early before it started blowing up. And we very quickly realized this was about to get like exponential. This was going to get really bad. And to our credit, we made pretty aggressive decisions and we decided to take every single person in the company, including ourselves. And we said, we're not going to play this short-term rental game because we don't know when COVID is ending. We don't know. Our thesis was this is going to get way worse before it gets better. And we're not going to play this game. We're going to change the game and we're going to rent these apartments long-term. We're going to sign 12-month leases. We're going to play defense and we're going to neutralize the cost of the lease. So we took everybody in the company, including ourselves. We became leasing agents. And the idea was, let's take all these vacant properties that we have and let's sign 12-month leases. Whatever we need to do, we're going to sign those 12-month leases. So we started calling renters and scheduling tours and following up and gamifying and doing whatever we could to like get these tours scheduled. And in that process, we were like, wow, this is so painful. For us, it was life or death. So it didn't matter how painful it was. It was like, we do this or we die. So once we had broken out of the leases, we convinced people to break out of the leases. We signed 12-month leases. We deferred rent. We did whatever we could. We walked away being like, holy shit, that was so shitty. Why did we come from this world of Airbnb where Airbnb had built this beautiful platform that allowed me to make $40,000 a month, run this business in 13 different cities without ever going to a property, click of a button, somebody walks in, has the rental instruction. It was magical. And then we entered long-term and we're like, why are we scheduling these tours manually, doing them? You know, it was just so broken. And we were like, we need to build a business that solves this problem. And that was the genesis for Zuma.
So at that point, it sounds like you decided, okay, after, you know, kind of going down the rabbit hole with BiggerPockets, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you're into trenches, rolling up your sleeve and making it work. You're like, all right, the real play here is tech. It's, you know, yes, the platform ultimately, you know, where you're going to build your business is through real estate, but let's get into the tech business.
Exactly. Yeah. We declared the old company dead. We said we're going to completely restart. And I had like when we were starting the Airbnb business, I knew that the Airbnb business wasn't the end game. It didn't feel like that. To me, my vision was let's build a cash flowing business. Remember what I want. I always wanted optionality. So I was like, let's build a cash flow business that gives me optionality. And once we have optionality, we can figure out what to do next. So in my mind, I was like, I always thought I was going to build a technology company, but I wanted to do it on my own terms. I wanted to have this cash flowing business so I can fund it myself. And we realized exactly that there was a real problem. I think it was so clear. One of the issues that venture capitalists and founders have is, are you building a business that's a vitamin or a painkiller, right? Are you really solving a real problem? Because many people start businesses because it seems fun or whatever. But if you break it down to the nucleus, the only thing that matters is what is the problem, and is this a genuine, real problem, and do you have a solution that's solving that problem? So at the nucleus of the business, it was very clear to us because we had seen it. We were leasing agents. We had been exposed to real estate. We did it to save our business. We lived the problem, and the nucleus of the business was very clear that this is a real problem. And at the time, I think, you're not really thinking like, is it a technology company? Is it not? You're following your curiosity, right? I have a very strong belief that I think passion is overrated. I think passion is fuzzy. I think people should follow their excitement. I think excitement is a much stronger indicator. And I think it's the leading indicator to passion. I think excitement is tangible. You know when you're excited. You know when you want to do something that energizes you. So my barometer has always been, how do I follow my highest excitement? Where is my excitement going? Not passion, right? Because to me, passion is fuzzy. And, eventually you become passionate about things. But I think when you don't know what you're passionate about, people say, follow your passion. It's like, that's too fuzzy. If I don't know what my passion is, I think it's much easier to follow your excitement. Where do you see your energy changes? What excites you on a day-to-day? And you can observe that, right? For me, I realized podcasts excite me. Conversations excite me. And I think it's important to follow that. But yeah, to answer your question, I didn't know if it was a technology company. I didn't really think about that. It was more like, this is exciting. There's a real problem here. And it's our duty to make use of the investor that trusted us and actually build a business around that.
So you had a strong conviction about what the thesis was. You experienced it. It was very real because you had this idea that ultimately, due to external factors, didn't materialize, and now you're pivoting, and the pivot is it's so fundamentally flawed and inefficient. And so this is a real pain point that you've come to experience firsthand. So you're like, all right, let's figure out how to fix this and deliver it at scale. And obviously, you're smart, right? You and Kendrick, great degrees, great jobs, but never founded a company before, a tech company. So how do you get started down that path? I mean, so many of us have ideas of things that we see so clearly are broken, but the first thing we think is like, I don't know how to code. I don't know how to scale a business. So what made you think that you can do it, and how did you start?
That's such a beautiful question. There's a couple of inputs. I think one input that's pretty clear is delusion, right? I think most founders have a very real delusion, right? Even today, I mean, if you ask Danielle or anybody, I think I can do more than I actually can. I think other people can do more than they actually can, and I push that on other people, and I push that on myself. So I don't know. Maybe if we blend this back to my childhood, I got a lot of confidence from my parents. They gave me a lot of confidence that I felt like I can do things. But I think you just delude yourself, right? I think another thing that people make mistakes in is sometimes the smartest people are not founders because in some ways you have to be dumb. If you're too smart, then you think through things. If you're too analytical, you see the holes because the odds are not in your favor. whether you're just starting something, whether you're not now. So in some ways, being delusional and being stupid can actually be a superpower in the early days when the logical thing is not to do what you're doing. But I think it's another thing that I think people should do more is I actually believe that strategy is overrated. And I think execution is the only moat in anything, right? A product gets diluted. If somebody builds something, I can build. Why can't I build a feature like that? I think product gets diluted, but I think the better path here is like, don't overthink, execute. Action produces information. So the more action you take, the more information is produced. And then you can use the information that you have to inform the strategy that you want to take. But I think what happens is people try to intellectually theorize the right path before getting any information. If I'm deciding to make a bet or do something different, you can theorize, I can read all the textbooks I want, but like you need to do something, you need to take action, and then you need to reflect and pause and see what information you get, right? And then be reflective on that information and then use that to inform strategy. So I think the answer to your question is like, think less, do more, and delude yourself. I think deluding yourself is important actually.
So it sounds like it's just push forward, learn, iterate, optimize, don't overthink.
Don't overthink. Yeah. I really think the most expensive place, and if you look at enterprise value, like Google, Amazon, Apple, Nvidia, that's not what enterprise value is. Enterprise value is in the graveyard, where people don't take action and have these ideas and go to the graveyard and never execute on them. That's worth tens of thousands of trillions of dollars, right? That's where the enterprise value is. And I think oftentimes it's because you get stuck in analysis paralysis. So I would say like for people that are overly analytical, I think it's like this is where you actually tone back your analysis and just do and then learn from there.
It's a great perspective. I met you 4 years ago. It's been, in the span of tech companies and the life cycle, that's like a lifetime ago. I've seen, I've just really been impressed by your growth and your maturity as a leader since then. But no doubt that journey has had so many challenges and turns that no one really knows about. What's the biggest mistake you've made since you started your company, and what did you learn from it?
The thing that haunts me the most is hiring. I think hiring is one of those things that is so trite. People love to talk about how important it is to hire. But I think you don't actually realize how important it is in the early days. And the impact, the second degree and third degree impact it has on the next wave of the company, the next layer of employees. Ultimately, I believe that 90% of the job of hiring somebody is done even before you have your first interview. I think most people hire for roles that they haven't really deeply thought about, including myself, what we did. Oh, I need a salesperson. Okay, let me just get somebody that is friendly and talkative and like people like. Okay, great. Let's hire this guy. Oh, this guy seems pretty talkative and cool. Like, let's hire him. In reality, what you need to do, especially for an executive role, is be really, really intentional about what you want. So we do something in the company called a mock doc. So it's mission, outcomes, competencies. So we have this whole process in our company where it requires an extensive amount of work to actually even hire some, like to even propose to hire somebody, there's all this pre-work that needs to be done. You need to write a mock doc. So you need to clarify, what is the mission of the role? What are the outcomes that you want this person to achieve? What are the competencies that you want this person to have? Then from the mock doc, you need to build a scorecard. If these are the competencies that you want, what questions specifically are you going to ask in the interview process that help you map to those competencies? And how are you going to create a universal scoring system where you can actually evaluate people independently? Okay. Now, when you think about interviews, I think interviews oftentimes are a waste of time, actually, in some ways, because why would I judge somebody on how they're communicating to me or answering my questions? When in reality, I think a much better way to self-assess is have the person actually do the job. So if they're a salesperson, here's what we do. Here's all the material. You have 72 hours. Ask me any questions you want. Call me midnight. I'll answer them. On Friday, let's do a presentation. You're a salesperson. Let's sell my product. I want to see what you actually do, right? I don't want to talk about what you do. I want to see it. Secondly, I think references are extremely important. We do at least 6 references for roles. For executive roles, I've done 15 references because I want to build a mental pattern of what do people think of this person. I don't want to, it's useful to hear what they say about themselves, but I want to hear what other people say. So in our process, we have the scorecard, we have the mock doc, we do references. We also do something called a backgrounder video, where we record a 30-minute backgrounder video on the company. So what is the role? Why does the role matter? What is the origin story of the company? What are our company values? What makes somebody successful in this role? And most importantly, why you shouldn't join the company. We're very, very clear on who we are. And this is all from learning. I didn't do this earlier, but we're very clear on why you shouldn't join. So oftentimes I anti-sell the role. I tell them hey, this is going to be what I do is I make the role seem harder than it actually is, worse than it actually is, because I want them to come in. I think what most companies do is they oversell. The person comes in and they're this is not what it was. But I actually over-index on, hey, we work we work weekends. We work evenings. That's normal. That's what we do. We don't work all weekends. But I want them to come in preconditioned, right, understanding what it's like, because that's the culture. So I over-index on the culture. And the backgrounder video is a really cool thing because it allows somebody to come in. Normally when you interview somebody, you're asking them questions and then they get 5 minutes at the end to really understand what you do. I think it's actually unfair for the candidate. I think the candidate should get a lot more information about the company. If I was interviewing for a role, I would want a 1-to-1 matching. If they're going to take 2 hours to interview me, I want 2 hours with them. I want to ask them 2 hours. If you're going to spend 4 hours on interviewing, I'm going to spend 4 hours interviewing you, right? I think it's fair. And I think so in order to help solve that problem, we record these videos where it's a 30-minute overview on here's what the company does, here's what we do, here's why you should join, here's why you shouldn't join, here's our vision, all this stuff. So the candidate can watch that beforehand. And then actually when they have those 10, 15 minutes at the end, the questions are much more sharp and they're much more informed. You're not trying to catch up, learn about the company, and then ask your questions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, I think I like that. There's a lot of learnings there, because you're right. It's, usually 55 minutes out of the hour is asking questions. And then it's almost like an assumptive close. I know you want to work here. You got 5 minutes. I'm sure you're going to want to work here no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is it's in the company's best interest to actually make sure that the candidate understands the role, because you want that match. You want that match. So in some ways, let's see if this is a red flag or people think it's controversial, but what I actually do is I'll actually do interviews in the evenings. So I'll do interviews at 7 p.m. sometimes, 8 p.m. And for me, it's not that I'm trying to bait them or or purposely like, if I'm free during the day, the understanding is more, is this person like willing to be flexible? Because like the reality is there's going to be things that we have to do in the job that like is at odd times. And I'm not a parent. I know that, people are parents, and if you want to do it at 9 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. because you're putting your kids to bed, that's totally fine. But to me, it's kind of been an interesting like barometer to just see like, is this person really going to lean in or not?
It's an interesting perspective. So, it's being a founder must be a absolute roller coaster, right? You're constantly shifting from highs to lows and everything in between. What has been the lowest part of the journey so far with Zuma, and how'd you navigate through that?
There's been so many low journeys, low moments. Yeah, man, it's hard to actually to really understand what it's like. I think it's very also, I'll answer the question, but I have a side point. Being a founder is extremely hard, but there's so many harder jobs. Like being a stay-at-home mom and having to work, or being a single mom and having to work a job, or, you hear a lot of immigrant stories where they work from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., 12 a.m., like 7 days a week, or like dealing with that's real stress. That's hard. So like building a company is hard, but I think there's so many harder jobs. Specific to our journey, there's so many low moments, man. I think losing big customers when it really matters is not fun. I'd say the hardest thing though is there's not a lot of like there's not a lot of like appreciation, right, from anybody. Right. I don't know if this is a moment or this is just the entire experience, but like, and rightfully so, right? You don't need your employees to like be cheering you on and all that stuff. But I think there's just an order of magnitude more responsibility. And no matter what you do, the you'll only hear when you mess up, which I think is hard. And maybe it ties into like, my background, right? Like I'm taking agency, like I don't need this. So maybe in some ways I'm playing into that, and that's why I'm good for this role. Cause it's like, I don't need your approval. I don't need, your whatever. But it's just very lonely, dude. It's very tiring and thankless and painful, and some of the lowest points I probably haven't experienced because I don't know what I'm giving up, right? I often think about like, what are all the things I've sacrificed? I have no girlfriend. That's not because I'm a founder. I mean, there's plenty of founders that, have girlfriends, but I think, I probably, because I'm not prioritizing that. What else am I not prioritizing? I don't see my family as much as I want. My grandmother was in the hospital because she had pneumonia, and I didn't call her for the longest time. If she had passed away, would I have regretted that? There's just so many things. I think the low moments are like the moments that I don't even know that I'm missing, like all the sacrifices that I'm making for some arbitrary outcome. Is this going to be successful? You're just like, it's so unknown. You don't know what's going to happen, but you're making all these sacrifices in the present moment, and you're making the sacrifices. So I think that's tough because the grass is always greener. Everybody looks at another situation and says, oh, I wish I was that person, or I wish I was doing. So this isn't me complaining, but I think it's like, it's just so unknown. I feel like I don't know if I'm living the life that, like, are these sacrifices worth it? Is this obsession I have like worth it? Am I giving up too much for this pursuit? So I think about that, right? I think it's important to like think about that because I'll die at one point. You'll die. And then when you're on your deathbed and you're reflecting on your life, who, like, people think they're more important than they actually are. Like, we're building something that I'm really proud of and I think helps a lot of people. But I'm not that important, you know? Like, so I just like, well, I just want to make sure, I think the lowest point or the lowest points are like, am I actually like living the life that I won't regret one day?
That's, I think it's something that resonates with all of us. We all ask ourselves that question. But what you said earlier, what we talked about earlier in regards to continuously achieving milestones and just feeling like you can't stop, I think is what keeps us going. So many of us who are wired that way just keep going, because I think there's this feeling like at some point in our journey, we are going to have a time to look back and say that, yeah, I'm glad that I pushed through every single, all those milestones and all those challenges that just, where I pushed myself really hard, because I have high expectations of myself. Thank you for sharing about that. I want to switch gears and kind of go in a more rapid fire kind of format. Let's talk about the industry and PropTech and really all the new PropTech companies that are springing up. That I'm super supportive and passionate about PropTech, supportive of founders, cheering people on. I want to see them succeed, because being a buyer on the operator side all these years, just really see the promise and the change that technology can bring to the industry to make it, make the industry better for everyone, for owners, for operators, and most importantly, for residents that we all cater to. So again, we'll kind of go through some of these questions in a rapid fire format, but what advice do you wish that you had received 4 years ago?
Pay more attention to hiring, because it's the most important thing. The people that you bring in is the culture that you build, and the culture is everything.
I have this belief, and you've heard me say this before, that in multifamily, the best product doesn't always win. What's your take on that, and how should founders think about positioning their companies?
I think investors, most people overvalue moats. I think they think there's moats in products. There's industries where you can have a true moat, like a network effect of some sort. You look at Facebook or Instagram or whatever. I think most industries don't have any moats. I think product is not a moat. I think the only moats are execution. And I think brand is a really important moat. So I agree with you. The question you have to ask is, how big do you want to win? If you want to win, I think everybody can win. But if you want to win big, that's where I wonder if, I don't know if everybody can win. Like, I don't know, there has to be a company that wins. But I think in this industry, yeah, we talk about this, right? Like, even with Or, right, who is building Ven, which is both a great product, but also values relationships. Like, most companies sell a product and then build a relationship, where I feel like you need to build a relationship and then sell a product. The other way around.
Absolutely. When you said that you think a good brand or a brand is a moat, tell me more about that. What does that mean? I mean, are we talking about names, logos? What does that really mean, that it's a moat?
I think, to me, brand, it's an emotional connection that people have with the company. When I think about me as a buyer of a product, we're a startup, so we don't spend a lot of money on software or tooling. But when I think about the small products that we use or services we use, I like to think I'm a logical person. I like to think that I think deeply about things. But when I do a retro on how I actually make some decisions, a lot of the decisions are emotional. A lot of the products or services I use are emotional. But here's the thing. It can be emotional. I can make a decision. Here's why I actually agree with your point. Whether the product is better or not actually doesn't matter. I think the experience that the customer has is what matters. You can have a worse product, but the customer service and the experience and the willingness and ability to cater to that customer can actually lead to a better outcome what do you think about that?
I completely agree. I think that this is such a relationship-based industry, and so many operators are, facing just constrained from a resource standpoint, and they're just trying to survive on, prioritization on a daily basis, right? And there's so many things that happen, unpredictable fire drills. So we don't always have the opportunity to extract all the value that you possibly can from every tool or every technology. So it's really about finding, like, how can it solve most of the problems without needing to go down an exhaustive checklist of all the features. Solving some of the problems can be, the tool is more than good enough. We're never going to use all of it, but there's great support behind it, right? Or the company we're partnering with really understands how to set it up for our unique needs that are different from one of their other clients, right? Or they're very responsive, or they give us resources and help to step in when we're deficient on resources. So that's what I mean when I say I don't think, and I feel strongly about this. There's sometimes, or too often, too many founders are so focused on the best product. We engineered our product the best, or we raised the most money, or, we have the most robust feature set. And that works well in B2C businesses. B2B, specifically in multifamily, that's not always going to be the formula that really wins. So I'm going to turn it back to you and ask you, because I see this journey a lot with founders in this industry, and that's why I'm very vocal with newer founders that, don't even have a product that anybody knows about, but I know they're building their company, is don't be so focused only on the products, on the product features, right? That's important, but do spend a lot of time thinking about how you're going to position yourself to the market. How are you going to deliver the solutions? So I'd love to hear from you. And I know we're trying to go through the rapid fire here, but just quickly, like, how has that evolved for you? I mean, you were a first-time founder. You came into an industry, right? Great experience. How have you seen, or what's the evolution been between how much you leaned into your product features to now really understanding the industry in a much deeper level? Because I've seen changes. I think I could answer the question, but I want to hear from you. How have you changed based on what you've understood about the industry?
Yeah, very good question. I'll start off by saying how I've changed, because I think that informs how my behavior and our decisions have changed. 4 years ago, I was much less confident. I used data rather than intuition. I leaned on the thoughts of others. I looked to investors and founders and people that were, quote unquote, more successful than me for advice. And I would take that advice, I'd take the average of that advice, and I'd deploy it into the company. And what that led to is a lot of mediocre decisions, a lot of decisions that I didn't feel like I connected with, but I did because I didn't believe in myself. As I've spent more time building this company, I've learned to trust my intuition over data, over other people's advice. One of my favorite quotes, it's in my bio in LinkedIn, is mute the world and build your own. I think it really resonates with me because I did the opposite. I bumped up the world's volume and I built it based on that. Now I'm trying to do the opposite, which is I'm muting. I don't care what other people are doing. I don't care if they're paying for this vendor event and sponsoring this thing. It's like, I'm going to just reflect and really think about what my own intuition tells me and make decisions. So that being said, it's changed a lot. I mean, you've seen it. It's changed a lot. And I think I really broke it down from this is trite, but from first principles. And I thought about, okay, if the assumption that people buy things because they like people is true, and they have relationships is true, if that is a true assumption, how do I then build relationships that will then impact the business in a way that is scalable, in a way that I can continue to do, and in a way that serves my strengths? Another big mistake I made early on in the company is I felt this pressure to be involved in everything, which I think you have to be in a startup in some degree, but and I would ignore what I felt like my strengths were, and I would focus on my weaknesses and do all of that. I think a much better approach is to really deeply understand what you spike in and what strength, what you spike positively in, and throw as much energy, effort, input, time, resources into those things that you spike in, because that will result in exponential value, right? Like you don't want to just throw energy in everything and just have a lot of mediocre results. It's like really be intentional on what you're good at and really spend time and resources and energy on that. So I thought about the problem. I was like, okay, if you need to build relationships in the industry and that affects, how you do business, what is a way that I can do that that's genuine, that is scalable, and that I enjoy? So then I was like, okay, well, I don't think I'm great at a bar with like the 50 people and like trying to build relationships there. Like I don't get a lot of energy from that. Sometimes it's fun to, have fun, but like I'm not a guy who, like, I wouldn't say I spike on the conference floor. I'm not like going and cold approaching people and trying to build relationships. To me, it feels like a losing game. When you look at conferences, the dynamic for a conference is you have a conference hall, you have the key decision makers that everybody wants to talk to, and you have all these piranhas that are vendors that are vying for the attention of these decision makers, doing whatever they can. As a decision maker, you don't it's kind of annoying. I feel like if like people are just kind of all obviously coming up to you and doing it, like it's not a game that's set up to win, in my opinion, right? So I was like, okay, well, how can I actually build relationships and how can I tap into my skill set? And I was like, hey, I've always liked podcasts. I've always loved asking questions. I find it, as I told you, easier to ask questions than to answer them. And that's just been a default pattern of my life. So I was like, well, why don't I start this podcast and sit down with, we interview, I just told you I did the founder of, Venn, I did Or, so it's not only industry decision makers, it's everybody. But how can I sit down with people and actually build a genuine relationship with them, actually understand them? And, I didn't look at any of the podcasts that existed. I didn't study any industry expert. I didn't study any influencer, but I went off, where do I think my strengths are? What would I enjoy doing? And how do I think I can tie those things into having business impact? And the podcast came about, and I was like, I'm not going to enjoy, to really understand somebody, I can't do that off Zoom. I also wouldn't enjoy that. I actually have a lot of ADHD, so it's hard for me to focus. So if I'm on Zoom and I'm getting a message here, I wouldn't enjoy that. I projected that experience out and realized that by episode 9 or 10, I would have stopped. So I was like, okay, what is the experience that I can do such that by doing it, regardless of what happens, it would be joyful by just doing it, right? So the answer was in-person podcasts, learning about people's lives, asking questions that people don't ask, really understanding them, right? Can I walk away from this conversation either feeling really close to them because we've connected, we've both been willing to share, and B, like I said in the beginning, selfishly better understand myself. Because I believe that you can learn something from anybody, right? So yeah, sorry, I know that was a long answer, but the idea is I moved away from trusting other people. I moved into trusting myself. I leaned into my intuition. I broke down the problem in its most simple form, and then I rebuilt the solution that I thought was authentically me and scalable.
Yeah, so it sounds like what your message here is, it's really about finding some way to stand out. Hopefully you're not telling other founders to all start podcasts, because I feel like there's so many podcasts in this industry. I do love yours, and I love the different, kind of just the unique angle of it. And it's made me really intrigued about it, and I'm eager to tell my story. I love that it's not about accolades and wins and, titles and all of that. I think it's getting real, but not every other founder is going to be able to do that, right? So it sounds like what you're saying is really find something that feels authentic to who you are. Don't force yourself into this notion that you have to be the loudest, that you have to spend the most, that you have to sponsor everything and throw all the parties. Find something that feels authentic to you. Because let's face it, if, as a founder, you're sponsoring a big party, but at the end of the day, you're not necessarily comfortable with networking in big crowds, then it's like you're purposely putting yourself in a position where you're just not going to win.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. That's my point. And I think a big thing when you think about winning, right? I think people start from the premise of, okay, what are the rules of the game? And then how do I understand those rules and then win the game? Mm-hmm. Where I think you should actually question the game itself and question the setup itself and actually wonder, like, what is a new game that I can design that I'll win no matter what? Like, how can I make this easy mode? Me going to a conference and trying to vie for Daniel Polino's time, and all these other vendors are coming up to them, and I'm having a shallow conversation, and they're like actually not wanting to be in the conversation, and they're getting pulled away. It's like in my mind, it's a losing game. And I'm not saying, but if you're somebody who is really good in person and can like build those, like Lucas, Lucas is amazing at this from 100. He's genuine. He's life of party. People love him. Like he's leaning into his skill set, his strengths. So what I would leave people with is like really understand yourself, understand where your strengths are, and whether that's the popular thing to do or not popular or common or not common. It doesn't matter, because you want to lean into how you can set the game up so that you win.
Right. It's a great point. So let's talk about conferences. I feel I keep saying that we're in this rapid fire but stuff's coming to mind that I feel like is important for us to talk about. Conferences are a big force in this industry. I love going to conferences. It's such a relationship business, but it's striking to me how, just how it all works, right? Because the vendors share such a large proportion of the overall cost or expense to attend conferences, right? And I think for the larger companies, there's kind of a clear ROI and they're able to afford it, but the burden is quite high from a proportional perspective for the early stage, startups. And I always think about it this way: is like a founder or two co-founders, they have an amazing idea. They're driven. They're delusional, like you said earlier, and they're like, let's just do this. Like, let's not overthink it. Let's do it. They have, whether you want to call it excitement or you want to call it passion, they have a strong conviction, and they're going to take a huge risk that, let's face it, few people are willing to do. And they're so focused on building this game-changing technology, but then they finally step into the industry and realize, okay, this is not all about just focusing on the product. We have to spend at conferences and get our logo everywhere. And that's how you're going to get noticed. And so I think I've thought about this often. Founders they must have this quandary of, I've got a limited pool of funds, right? I owe a debt literally to my funders, my investors. And I have to figure out how to scale this business, but I can't just spend on making the product better, because, again, back to my point, the best product doesn't always win. So talk about the burden that a founder has on how much of the money do I spend on product, engineering, R&D versus like sales and parties and entertainment. It's got to be hard to figure that out.
That's a fantastic question, and there's no formula, there's no rule book, right? Like when you get later stage and you're doing tens of millions of ARR, there's these there's all sorts of like percentage of R&D spend to revenue and the rule of 40 and all these metrics that are more clear because you're an operating business. But in the early days, when you're in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or early millions in ARR, there's no formula. So if you were to ask me how to answer that, I think it goes back to like, you can't overthink it. You have to like make bets where you don't have all the data. You have to trust your intuition, and you have to figure out a way that feels more like art than science. I think that's the truth. More often as I go through year 5 of these conferences, I think back, and it's hard because people would tell me in the early days when I was allergic to spending this much money on conferences, they're like, oh, it's intangible. You can't measure it. Like, you just got to do it because you never know. And there's some truth to that. Like I think our deal sizes support, it supports if I spend, and that's why it's all a marketplace, right? That's why people charge so much for these conferences, because it's a marketplace. They know that they have pricing power. So in some ways it's a fair market because like there's pricing power, and like they understand that if they can charge $25,000 for a conference, like the vendor is going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, so they should pay it, right? It's a fair marketplace. But it's more an art than science. I have made decisions more. I reflect on how much we've spent on this podcast and the RV, and think about how much I've actually spent on conferences. And I'm like, well, what is really adding more value relative to how much I'm spending? But I don't know. I don't know if there's a clear answer to your question. I think it's just an art.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's why I brought it up. Honestly, there's no real answer. Obviously, this conversation is not about, we got to get rid of conferences or it's not fair. I think there's so much good that comes from them. But I often wonder, for a company that is, so many early stage startups, right? Every dollar matters. And it's not like what they're being charged. You can say, okay, that's clearly unfair, but it's more of when you're not getting immediate return and you have this pressure, because let's face it, there's a pressure of, you need to sponsor this, you need to put that, and it's tough, and so I often wonder, how does a founder like that kind of go through that mental exercise of how do I prioritize?
Yeah, I think another answer to your question is, I think in some ways constraints fuel creativity. I think you can actually build a better company in many cases with less money because constraints force you to be creative. In the early days, one of our first properties in the Airbnb business that Kendrick and I had was a 1-bedroom property in San Bruno. It was our first property we rented in January 2019. The rent was like $2,400 a month or something like that. And for the first 3 months, we were losing money, tons of money. We didn't have a lot of money, and it was scary. And what we ended up doing was we ended up taking the 1-bedroom, building a Lego wall, and converting it into a 2-bedroom and renting it out as a 2-bedroom. Now, if I was flush with money and I could weather that thing, would I have cared enough? Would I have been as creative enough? Maybe, maybe not. So I don't know. I think in some ways, like, there's also extreme advantages to not having a lot of money. You remember in the early days, we had no money, so we do that Hawaiian shirt thing. And that was like a micro form of creativity. It is challenging because it is a lot of money. I won't deny it. I mean, it's a lot of, these conferences do charge a fair amount of money for these things. But it's an art. You just have to choose your battles and choose which ones
I love
you
the
go
way
to.
that you, kind of gave us that example about the 1-bedroom that you turn into a 2, because your back was against the wall. You were losing money. You're scared. And that's what caused you to dig deep into your creativity and unlock additional value. Like you said, if the business was doing fine, that would have been one unit out of so many. It would have been a rounding error, and you would have just been like, it's fine. And overall, the overall venture that we're doing here is doing well. So I think that's a great way to position this, right? It's not about, should conferences change or should they charge? It's really more about like, hey, if you find value in this and it makes sense for you, do it. If you think that you need to dig deeper and be noticed in a different way, right? Like, you're here at this conference, we're here, but you're also doing a very different approach than others. And that's not to say that it's going to be better for one company than another, but at the end of the day, you're doing what feels unique to you. And I think that that's the best takeaway.
Exactly.
It's like, this is where you feel the most comfortable, and this is what feels like, all right, this is worth. And let's face it, you did just take a 4-day drive to get here. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you put in a lot of effort.
And my time.
And it meant for you that this is valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think it goes back to like creating intrigue, doing something that you can uniquely do, meeting decision makers where they're at, standing out. I don't know if I think a byproduct of all of this is standing out, but I wouldn't say I optimize for that, candidly. I think I optimized to build relationships in a way that was scalable. That was always my like metric of like, how do I build relationships that are genuine, that are scalable, and how do I do it, in a way that's different. And then the byproduct is like this crazy RV and coming to the conference and doing the podcast and all of that stuff.
Well, kudos to you, because you're certainly having much longer and more in-depth conversations than those quick ones. Like when someone, I always, I'm zooming from one thing to the next in a conference and someone stops me and it's like, I want to spend time with them. I want to give them their, respect that they're trying to build the business, but it's like you're running from one thing. So it's kind of hard to have those conversations. So kudos to you for the creativity on making sure that you've got ample time to, to get to know someone really and break down that barrier of just, familiarity.
And that's not a figment of my imagination. Is that the experience on the operator side, right? Like if I was a decision maker, or if I was somebody, that everybody wanted to talk to, I feel like is that what happens, right? Like you're at these conferences, these people are trying to talk to you. What is that experience?
Yeah, it's, again, I told you when we started this little segment here that I have a passion to support founders. To be honest with you, I've wanted to be a founder and I've had different ideas, but I've been too scared to do that. And that's my real truth. So when I see people that have taken those risks, I have a high admiration for them. And I want to do anything I can to help them, whether it's, me helping them with supporting their cause directly through my buying power or through connecting them with others, or even just offering them helpful advice that would make a difference. But it's certainly challenging because what ends up happening is because of the lack of time and just like zooming from one, quickly from one session to another or one demo to another, sometimes people catch you in a moment where you have just a quick bit of attention or fleeting attention. And so ultimately they feel like they have to resort to saying, hey, we can produce a higher conversion rate. We can, do it faster, better, cheaper. And ultimately, I understand why they have to jump into that. But as a buyer, you hear that every day, all day, in person, on booked demos or meetings, and also literally flooding your inbox constantly with, cold emails saying the same thing. So I have a huge amount of respect for anybody in business development and that's working at a startup or a founder of a startup. So I don't want to make it sound like, hey, those tactics are just not the right way to go about it. The truth, but I'm being honest and just saying that it's hard to distill the noise down because you do hear that a lot. So anytime that someone has a creative way of kind of capturing your attention in a different manner is very impactful because that's actually much more rememberable. Right. And so I love what you're doing, and I'm not trying to, encourage others to copy the ideas that you've had recently, but these are very rememberable. And in marketing, we call them ownable, meaning like that thing was uniquely that company. So it's an ownable concept and it's a very rememberable concept. And there's no shortage of other types of ideas, right, that others can do. But I think obviously as an industry on the operator side, we have to really go out of our way to try to give people time because we can't on the one hand be complaining about that this industry is behind the technology, we're lagging and there's not enough innovation. And then at the same time, not giving these super talented, super driven founders the time that they deserve to try to get their bright idea to the market, right? So there's two sides to that coin. And I think that that's where we all have to work together as humans and really understand like, hey, I have my priorities, they have theirs. How can we meet in the middle so that everybody feels like we're in this together?
Totally agree.
So we're gonna go to the last section here because inquiring minds want to know. Of course, everybody's so curious about what you've got the podcast going, you've got this amazing RV, haven't seen anything like this before. I've got a few questions and we'll work our way through these. These are also kind of rapid fire, but what's been the most surprising thing about running this podcast?
There's so many things. One thing in Texas is how many people grew up on a farm and went to a school with less than 10 people in their class. I heard that story so many times. I was like, wow, why does everybody growing up on a farm with less than 10 people in their class. That's one thing. I think the second thing is how common imposter syndrome is. That's one of the hottest topics, and people really connect with that when I bring that up. And then the third thing is how often people go through life not answering these questions or even being asked these questions, right? Many times when I ask these questions, people pause for a while, like kind of like I did, right? Like, because people are not asking you these questions on a day-to-day. So it was surprising to me to see people actually answer these questions, but think it through in real time because they had never been asked it. And how much more connected I feel when somebody is being authentic and vulnerable. That was really shocking. Like, there's many times after the podcast you've seen where people have cried, or I walk away from the podcast and like I give them a big hug, and I just feel so connected in 1 hour, not knowing them. I can walk away being like, I just feel so connected to you. I think that's one of the cool things.
Yeah, I love hearing you say that because I've been doing so much reflecting now that I'm on my kind of like break right now in my career. It's been a good time of reflection, and what I keep thinking about is, you know, how vulnerability and having a message that's different than what you normally hear can connect you. So just as I was saying earlier, that as a buyer in the industry, you hear the same, you know, increased conversion, NOI, et cetera. Wouldn't you, as as a founder, or even if you were doing this podcast and it was all about, you know, the titles and the, you know, NMHC top, whatever, it's like it would be hard to remember because of the, you know, there's so many different titles, and it's almost like that's like the parallel to like features. Whereas now that you're getting to know the human and their unique story, it's super rememberable, and it's just very different than what you normally hear, right? Even the way that name tags are done at conferences, it's all about the title. And, you know, it would be like our society is just so focused on things like that, when really what actually matters is like sitting across the table from someone and just getting to know them.
100%. That's why in some of these podcasts, I don't even know, like sometimes I don't even know what they do. Like I know their title, but I don't know any of their awards or accolades. I, in some ways, actually don't research a lot because I want to kind of talk to them as
right.
I can talk to anybody about personal things because like we're all humans. We're all tied together by being a human. So like I can always connect with them on that. But in some ways it forces me also to just like really understand their story, right? Because everybody that's the crazy thing, dude, is like after doing all of these podcasts, you realize like everybody also has a really personal story. Right? Like whether you're the CEO, whether you're the leasing agent, like, dude, we're all humans. We all like have the same emotions. We all go through the same shit.
And we shouldn't hide it. I mean, that's another thing I think I say as I've, you know, gone through my journey in life. It's like there's so many things that I used to consider to be something I would be ashamed for people to know that now I just own, and I'm comfortable in my skin, and it helps you to connect with people, right? I think a lot of people will remember out of this conversation, you know, of course, you're the CEO of this company, you're getting noticed, but you know what many people may remember is that he was that middle child that was too shy to jump on the bed with the kids. And I don't say that in an embarrassing way, but like, you know, we all have had some feeling that we can relate to in that manner. And it's something that, you know, that is so fundamental to how you're wired and how you approach life, right? So let's talk about the RV tour. Where did the idea for this come from? And why did you decide that this was like a bet worth taking? Because, I mean, it's a cool idea, but putting it into practice, it's like you know, so many inconveniences. You're leaving your home, your city, your social life. I know you're all about fitness and routine, and which anybody who's into fitness also cares about their diet in some form or fashion, or at least predictability of what their diet is. And I mean, I can think of so many reasons not to do this, but why did you decide it was something worth doing?
I think that's partly it, is everybody can think of so many reasons not to do this, which makes it one of those things that like, it's almost like impossible to copy. Like who's gonna leave their social life, leave their house, leave everything behind and go take an RV? Like oh, if I create this like cool design, cool website, yeah, you can look at my website, hire a designer and copy it. But this is this is one of those things where I was like, because of all those things is why I'm going to do it. And again, man, I'm really leaning it. I'm in this phase of the company and my life where it's like, I'm really just muting the world and I'm trusting my intuition and my gut. And like this RV thing, I took some inspiration from Dimitri. Knock, I don't know if you know this, Knock did this 10 years ago. So I had heard that story, and I think that played in my mind a little bit. But it was also like, I'm traveling a lot for this podcast, and like, what is a way that is scalable? How can I like build relationships at scale that are genuine? And, me flying around is like, I could do that, or I could just like get an RV and combine it all and shoot podcasts in the RV and go city to city. So I think it's one of those things where, we were talking before recording, where you said, one of your favorite things to do is actually just like to shower, because that's the only time you get where your kids are not, there, and you don't have to respond to work. You're literally like locked in. For me, one of my favorite things is going to the steam room after a workout. I don't bring my phone in, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like reflecting. And I remember doing this for like 2 weeks, and every time I'd end that steam room day, I'd iterate the idea a little bit more, and I'd go in and then I'd iterate, and it became this space where I was like, okay, I'm going to like really iterate on this idea. And it just happened over like 2 weeks where I like every day I improved it a little bit more. I was like, what am I really trying to solve for? How can this work? And I just like, I just saw it so clearly. I think one of the things that maybe founders or some people have is like, I feel like I see a lot of things in my mind very clearly. But people don't see it, and which it makes me, and it's actually kind of a problem sometimes, because it frustrates me, because I'm like, how do you guys not see this thing? And then sometimes I can't explain it, but just saying you feel it is not enough, right? People want tangible answers. So it was one of those things where it's like, I could explain this because it was, I understood logically how it would impact the business. But it was one of those things where I just like took inspiration, talked to Dimitri, talked to another founder that had like explored doing this and had done this in a totally different industry, and was just like, I'm just going to like lean into this and like do it. And honestly, like one of the funniest things people ask me is like, are you doing this by yourself? And I'm like, do you think I'm like driving an RV, like going around the country recording and working my job by myself? I'm like, no, that's insane. So a big thing has been like, Daniela and David, who you now have met, and like having all this help and building the friendship. I think one unexpected thing from this whole thing is how close like we've all gotten. We didn't know each other before this. Like I had never known, I knew, I got connected through a mutual friend, but I had never known them. So like, being 1 month in, seeing how close we've gotten and how everybody's like contributing and helping has been surprising on the upside, because it's just you talked about my routine. This is like, I was telling them, this is the first time in 17 years, from 12, I started working out at 12 years old. I'm not super fit or anything, so it doesn't show, but this is the first time in 17 years where I haven't like worked out. There's been a 2 weeks where a 2 week period where I didn't even work out once, right? It's never happened before. I've always at least worked out once or twice. But in some weird way, it's almost detaching me from like, I'm a very routine oriented person. It's almost detaching me from what I thought I always needed, right? Like, what I've learned from this RV trip is I'm not actually attached as much as I thought to material possessions. I'm not actually a victim of my routine. I can go a little bit of time not working out, I like, so it's exposed me to things that I never thought I could live without, that I was so dependent on. And it's one of those things where I'm going to look back. I really believe this, when I'm 70 or 80 and I'm showing, my grandchildren pictures of the RV and telling them these crazy stories. It's one of those things that I'm just going to look back with super fond memories of. And if I have to sacrifice my routine for 2 months or 4 months, so be it.
Yeah, knowing you, that just means that when you get back to it, you're going to push yourself to limits you've never pushed yourself before.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, all right, I've got a couple more questions here for you, but you have to make me a promise. This is rapid fire, and the reason is not because I don't want to keep going, but because I want to get your realest, rawest answer without a lot of rationalization, just what comes to mind, and then I'll move on to the next question.
Deal.
Okay? So what's been the best part about being on the road?
The friendship with Danielle and David.
What's been the hardest?
Showering and like walking to the bathroom because you don't have a bathroom here, and like carrying your toiletries to the bathroom and walking back.
What do you eat?
A ton of David protein bars. They should sponsor me by now. If you open that closet, there's like 100 of them. David protein bars. We've been doing one meal a day. So I've been eating a lot of protein bars and then like having a big dinner like in the evenings.
Where do you find two people crazy enough to just like do this with you that you don't know? Like, how do you find people like that?
A good mutual friend who connected both of them to me. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. I asked a friend and he gave me both. He like referred both of them. That's honestly how I found them.
Now I almost want to ask, where do you find a friend that's cool enough to do that?
That's a good question. His name is Chris. Chris. He works at ClickUp. He was one of the early members of ClickUp. I got connected to him through a recruiter that we worked with. But I don't know, just random luck. Luck is the answer.
Amazing, and it's worked out beautifully. All right, this is the last one. So I, in one sentence, introduce Daniela. One sentence for her and one sentence for David. Who are they, and what do you like about them?
Daniela is one of the most thoughtful people I've met. She's extremely emotionally balanced and empathetic in ways that I haven't seen many people been able to do. And she has a control over her emotions, or at least that's my perception, externally more than I've seen. David is one of the most well-read people and can take on any debate with ferocity and willing to like fight out his arguments till the end. And he's extremely knowledgeable and well-read. That has been inspiring for me to be around.
That's amazing. I think now you've got the entire industry curious to learn more about them. So will you give them the opportunity to each have their own episode?
Oh, that's a good one.
You can interview them.
I like that.
The world's dying to know about them now.
I like that. Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, Shiv. I'm so proud of you. I'm really grateful to have you as a friend. I'm also really grateful that you're in the industry. You're really doing things that are helping the industry, and I mean that. And I do believe that you're inspiring people, and you're going to have a big impact on a lot of founders that are searching for how to be seen, how to be relevant, and how to position their companies. So I want to congratulate you on that, and thanks so much for letting me turn the mic on you for a change.
Thank you, man. I'm so glad we did this. Honestly, I was weirdly kind of nervous. I was like, I don't know if I'm super comfortable doing this or being in this position, but I couldn't think of any other better person to do this. You were nervous about doing this. You crushed it. That was insane. I mean, this is I'm looking at the clock. It's like we're 2 hours and 3 minutes in. So I think you found your next gig.
Well, since you're all about micro optimizations, next time we do this, it'll have to be shorter. And no, it's awesome. I absolutely was nervous. I've never done anything like this before.
You did a really
As
good
you know,
job.
I didn't really have much prep, but it's absolutely fun. So thanks for letting me do it.
Thank you.